used to play baseball a lot. Used to be pretty much addicted to it. I guess I kind of wanted to be a doctor from the beginning. Anything little kids would look up to. When we got to the hospital, my stomach hurt so bad they gave me morphine, and I don't really remember anything after that because I was out. They did the biopsy and they found out it was a stage 4 neuroblastoma. Didn't really know what that was. I knew it was cancer, but I didn't really know what cancer was either, but I knew it was bad, but I didn't know how bad.
He's got a tumor behind his heart. The same tumor wraps up his spine. My child's bones are breaking.
Your whole body feels like it's on fire. It feels like you're laying on a bed of nails.
He couldn't breathe, and he's screaming so loud, saying, "Stop, stop."
There's no more baseball, no more school. It was awful.
I've been to doctors in New York, Boston, San Francisco, Houston, and every single one of them says my son's gonna die.
Of course I want to live. Who doesn't? I mean, obviously I want to beat this disease, but I'm not going to be that sad if I don't.
My son said, I know I'm in a lot of darkness right now, but I've come to learn that the greatest amount of darkness, just the smallest amount of light, will overcome it.
Sort of had these moments when you ask God, and why my son? You know, why can't you use this in a different way?
We're in a series right now entitled Dark Places, There is Hope. And yesterday I was out raking my lawn, raking the leaves. Kind of had a flashback to high school. I had a friend who lived up the hill from me. His name was Chris, and Chris's dad would rake his leaves, and then there were kids from another neighborhood who would come in and just trash the leaves, spread them all back all over the yard, diving into them. And Chris's dad thought he had a great idea. So he raked the leaves again around the fire hydrant. So the kids from the other neighborhood came in again and quickly went to make a mess of the leaves and dove into the leaves, and they were met with quite a shock. Can you say separated shoulder and insurance claim? That's basically what happened. And when I think of life sometimes, this is kind of the feeling that I feel like I'm met with. You look at life and you see a big pile of leaves and you think, this is going to be fun. Here comes the adventure. Got a bunch of people with me. Let's just dive in. And all of a sudden, as you dive into life, you're hitting a fire hydrant. Life sometimes hits in a way that we don't expect, and it can hurt. Today, we're going to talk about grieving and loss. We've all experienced it at one point or another. For some of you, the greatest experience of loss or grief you had last week started about 7:30 in the city of Denver. And your week was ruined by that one event. For most of us, the game ends. You sleep off those 77 passing yards, and you can get up Monday morning and you can function. Other people wake up and their week is ruined until the following Sunday. The way they treat their dog or their spouse or their kids, the way they function at work, all of it is shot based on what happened for 3 hours on Sunday evening. You lie in bed and you blame the people who blew assignments and maybe the one person who dropped a pass, and you can't believe they called that play on third down. How could they? And your day and your life and your thought patterns all revolve around what brought grief. Some people bounce back from grief quickly, others don't. And I would say the same principle is true with bigger losses in life. Ones that can't be recovered from with a victory the following Sunday. Maybe you're able to relate to the story the Hallmarks shared about their son Ethan. And I wish I could tell you that Ethan today is a pastor or a CEO somewhere, but Ethan died on September 26th, 2014, from the cancer that he was fighting. They've now made a movie about his life, not just the test he went through, but the testimony that he kept through it. You may have lost a child, a spouse, or a family member. Maybe you went into a relationship and you thought he or she is forever. This is the one I've been waiting for. Everything is right with this person, and it just didn't happen that way. There's grieving, there's loss. Maybe it's financial. You may have been planning, you think you've done it right. X amount of money came out of your check. X amount of money went into your 401k, your retirement, your savings plan. You thought you were ready for anything and everything, and then anything and everything happens. And all the money you've put away is gone. According to CNN Money, in the United States and Canada, there were 5,000 more suicides in 2009 that many attribute to the stock market crash in 2008. It could have been a career that you knew was just for you. You knew you were wired for it. This is what you were born for. You bought a house, you settled in because you thought this is the job for the long haul. And the door slammed shut. The success that you knew would happen never took place. And you don't have to be old or grown to experience grief. You don't have to be out of school with degrees or into adult life to experience grief. You can be a child, you can be a teenager, you can be a student at any age and still face these type of things. For some, it's great. If they don't get an A, they might as well have failed. That was never a challenge for me, I'm just saying. My middle initial is C, and all through middle school, that's where I was. Coming out of high school for me, though, in the 4 years in high school, or leading up to those 4 years of high school, I lost a 10-year-old cousin to a misdiagnosis of a stomach sickness. He died. I had 2 friends commit suicide, 1 die in a car accident, 2 more commit suicide within a year or 2 after graduating high school. Went through a traumatic church split in the 10th grade, and my dad was the pastor. Had a grandfather who struggled with Alzheimer's move into our house, and he was challenging to begin with, and our everyday life was reminding Grandpa where he was and keeping his attitude at least halfway cheered up, so you're kind of walking on eggshells. This was the norm, on top of all the other loss that was going on. In any stage of life, it can seem like grief or depression can feel hopeless, lonely, and like it's the end, but it's not. It gets to a point where you can feel so numb that life and death just seem to blur. This brings us to our key figure today and through the rest of the weeks of this message, and that's Job. Would you turn with me, please, to Job chapter 1, page 359, and the Bible's in the seat backs. Job chapter 1. Now, Job is the oldest book in the Bible. It predates the writings of any other book recorded, and it was passed down for generations by oral tradition or oral history. The events of Job's life recorded here have for many made his name synonymous with grief and loss. Job chapter 1, beginning with verse 1. It says, "In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among the people of the East." Now, I want you to picture, for all of these animals, he had to have room for them to live. He had to have extra land to be able to raise the food for off-food growing seasons. He had to have helpers or working hands to take care of all these animals, plus the staff to take care of those who were taking care of all the animals. He had to have living quarters, or at least places where their tents could go up, which was very common in this time. Job did not have to worry about money. He was the Trumps or the Kardashians of his day. Let's read on. Verse 4. It says, his sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular custom. Now, there's an interesting dialogue that happens in the middle of Job chapter 1, and in it, it opens a door for Job to go through a string of unbelievable trials. Let's pick up reading in verse 13. It says, one day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was speaking, another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. Have you ever thought you had a bad day? Verse 20. It says, at this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Now, another attack, believe it or not, another round of attacks happened in Job chapter 2. And in Job chapter 2, it says this time it attacks his physical body to the point where he's got sores all over himself, and he takes pottery shards, pieces of broken pottery, and he scrapes his skin, and he cuts into the sores to be able to get some relief from the pain that he's going through physically. His wife looks at him, and in verse 9 of chapter 2, his wife says to him, are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die. He replied, you're talking like a foolish woman, and this word foolish means morally deficient. He says, you're talking like you're out of your mind. Should we accept good from God and not trouble? And once again, it says, in all this, Job did not sin in what he said. Now, there are no hard and fast set timelines for grief. As one person said, there are no stages capable of containing all of the experiences of love and pain. But as we walk through grief, we'll tend to experience 6 feelings or bouts of emotions that we're going to talk about today. And we see that Job experienced them as well. The first one that's faced is shock. Shock. Shock happens when your world collapses. So a number of years ago, our children were 9, 7, 4, and 2. And Gina had gone in for a checkup, and she gets a call back from the doctor that says, there's cancer. We can't tell you where it is. We can't tell you what kind it is, but we know it's there somewhere. Isn't that an encouraging call and conversation to have? So they start doing those tests and looking for cancer while I'm looking at my kids, all under 10 years old, and I'm thinking, this can't really be happening. How in the world do we go from the healthy family to all of a sudden what could be facing us? And everything seems surreal. It's almost like you're watching a movie from the outside. When I got the call about my mom, we were in an interview with someone who we were looking at bringing on staff at the church I was serving at. And we're in an Olive Garden, and my dad calls, and it was loud, so I kind of stepped out of where we were eating, and my dad says, Jack, you've got to come home now. And I'm thinking, I just talked to my mom 2 days ago. This is supposed to be a routine surgery. This is supposed to be a quick fix and out the door. And my dad is now saying they're telling the family to come home now. How is this even possible? Why now? Why her? Why us? It just seems like everything goes into shock. Can you imagine Job's response? Can you imagine what's going through his mind as these reports hit him one after another? Raiding parties from outside groups, that's common. Windstorms coming off the desert, very common. Fire in the desert, and different writers, some say this could have been volcanic activity. Some say it could be fires that start and sweep through the desert, which are pretty common as well. But all at once? Have you ever felt like you were going through your life and you thought, can I catch a break, please? The grief, the challenges that we face. And some people never move outside of the numb stage. Or they may move out for a while, but then they slide right back into feeling like they have no feeling. Everything is kind of surreal. In his book, The Lonely Now, Nicky Cruz records a poem written by a 15-year-old girl who lives in the state of numbness. She writes, "We are the ones on whose tombs they'll inscribe, died at 15, buried at 75. Out of the night we breathe a sigh for those who are dead but cannot die." There's no feeling. You don't know what to think. But then when that shock wears off, the feeling of sorrow can set in. And sorrow is where we begin grieving life's losses. We see this in Job chapter 3, verse 11. Job says, "Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb?" He says later in verse 24 and 26 of Job 3, he says, "For sighing has become my daily food. My groans pour out of me like water. What I have feared has come upon me. What I have dreaded has happened to me. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, but only turmoil." It's deep sorrow. And although sorrow and grieving are individual experiences, there are symptoms many people share after suffering personal loss. Symptoms such as physically being drained. You can't sleep at night. You're forgetful and unable to think clearly. Noticeable change in appetite, physical distress such as chest pains, headaches, nausea. Trying to stay extremely busy to avoid thinking about the grief that's just happened. Eating, drinking, and watching TV excessively. Trying to numb oneself. Participating in self-harm. Senses or dreams about the deceased, especially if you were incredibly close to them. Becoming withdrawn, lonely, apathetic. Frequent sighing or frequent breaking out in tears. All signs of grief and sorrow. Maybe you listen to this and maybe you can check the box on every one of those. Some of you have been through things in life where you're going, yep, been there, experienced it. Couldn't stop the crying, felt like I couldn't find a way out. Tried to numb myself by just keeping busy in other things. Maybe you got involved in cutting or pulling hair or scratching just to try and feel something and deal with the sorrow. The danger is, if we don't watch it, sorrow can become full-blown depression. Symptoms of that are grief for more than 4 months with no signs of improvement, prolonged or severe inability to function at home, work, or school, staying in bed, wanting to do nothing all day, thoughts of suicide or a preoccupation with death. Even your speech and your movement can become slower because it's harder to function and process what's going on, feelings of being worthless. If these symptoms persist, please hear me. Get help. Amen. Don't try and do it on your own. Don't put yourself in a box because that box will quickly begin to feel like a coffin. Get help. Talk to friends who you trust. People who have wisdom or have been through something like this. Talk to a family member. Come talk to one of the pastors. We have a counseling team here at the church. Talk to someone on the counseling team. Talk to your family doctor. But don't go through it alone. Get help. Don't live in the hole. It's part of the grieving process, but it can't be the place where you allow yourself to stop. Get help. Those with depression cannot simply snap out of it. It's real, but it can be treated. It can be dealt with. When we go through those feelings of sorrow, many times what comes next is the struggle of why me? The struggle because this is when life doesn't seem to make sense. When life doesn't seem to make sense. I want you to think with me for a moment about Mrs. Job. We're not given a name, but she's going through everything that her husband is. Ladies, think about leaving everything that's been your security, losing everything you've ever been able to count on. Think about losing all of your children in one catastrophic accident. Think about watching your husband go through skin irritation, watching his physical pain, and I'm sure it showed up on his face as he's trying to break through these scabs and deal with the sores on his body. She looks at her husband in all of this pain, and she says, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Do you think this all makes sense? Are you trying to act like everything's okay? Are you trying to stay above board as all this is going on? Why don't you curse God and die?" Life doesn't always seem fair. God doesn't always seem just. I look at Mrs. Job, and this is me. This is me, but my speculation is she doesn't hate her husband. She doesn't truly wish he would die. She's already seen all this death of her family. I think she's looking at her husband and she's just lashing out in pain. I don't know if you've ever done it. I know I have. Everything that's been bottled up in pain or anger or anxiety all lashes out at once. I wonder if she's looking at her husband, and her husband is one of those guys that as things hit him, he just rolls with it. Do you know people like that? They're like, I'm physically sick and I lost my job and we're broke and my kids are acting up, but bless God, it's going to be okay. Everything's good. The house blew up, but we'll find a place. It's all good. I'm the type of person, I go through little things and I see them and I'm like, I hate you. I'm wondering why I'm getting mad. I wonder if she looks at her husband and is like, how can you maintain such a calm? How can you trust God through something like this? Mother Teresa once wrote, "I know God will not give me anything I can't handle. I just wish he didn't trust me so much." As you go through these stages, as you hit struggle, anger will happen. So will fear, peace, joy, guilt, confusion, and a range of other feelings. You'll flash back and forth through many feelings at once. You may think about a family member who's just passed, and you're laughing at something that happened, and you're crying because they passed, and yet at the same time you're mad because you don't understand why. This is all part of the process of grief. One person said, grief can be absolutely crazy-making, but this does not mean that you're crazy. You're in the throes of the struggle. Next, there can be a slow acceptance. That is the beginning to the path of peace. A slow acceptance. Job wrote, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." It's a slow acceptance. You can't plan for this stuff. You can't flip your calendar and see when this type of thing is going to happen. You don't know when trials are going to hit. You can't open up your day timer and say, okay, so here's Christmas, here's Thanksgiving, here's Easter, here's where my life falls apart. You can't calendar this, but it hits and it happens. And sometimes you have to work through it, and as we'll talk about, and we've been talking about, there's no set stages or timeline for it. But you can begin to see, little by little, a slow acceptance of what's going on. There's a Chinese proverb that says, true gold is never afraid of the fire. True gold is never afraid of the fire, but we don't know what true gold is until it's gone through the fire. It's when we come out of the other side of the fire that we can see beyond the hurt and we'll know what's true gold in our life. Everything in our life, when we go through grief, when we go through these struggles or trials, everything will be shaken. Everything will be questioned. Everything will be challenged. But what comes out the other side of the fire? What is being worked in you right now? These final 2 points are where you start seeing what truly makes it through the fire. First, we start seeing. We start seeing and finding treasure even in dark places. Job, even in going through what he went through, it says he didn't sin against God by what he said, or in essence, doubting God. Now, this is only 2 chapters of a 45-chapter book. Job has 45 chapters, and as you read through it, there are questions. There are doubts. There's accusations. There's fear. But even in that, he begins seeing where God's hand is at work. The Lord, it says in verse 21, it says, the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised, even in the dark places. Some people say time heals all wounds, and I would say yes and no. Once again, you can't calendar this thing. There's no finish line with grief. This is not a race. Grief has its own lifespan, and it's unique to each one of us. But when your emotions start allowing you to see even a slight ray of hope through the clouds, then there's a spark to begin the healing. When your grief goes from being your ongoing battle and it starts to become part of your testimony, when the valley that he's walked you through, or maybe he's still walking you through, starts becoming a source of strength for others, it's signs of hope, it's signs of healing. Our grief can then become a service, an encouragement, a testimony to others. And that's the final blank. Our grief can become a service because God never wastes a pain. Amen. God never wastes a pain. We see this in the testimony of Job's life. People around him knew what was going on. They knew his struggle. You can't take the richest, most powerful man in the land and have things like this happen and think nobody knows about it. Think about it. If Microsoft went down tomorrow, do you think we'd hear a thing or two about Bill Gates? Here's Job standing out this much, head and shoulders above everyone else in the land. People knew what was going on. Others were probably talking about him. And we see that, and we're going to talk about that in 2 weeks when we talk about Job's friends. But others saw what was going on, and you got to wonder what was being said. You know, I heard what goes on in Job's house, and I bet that's why this happened to him. I've got a friend who used to work in Job's sheep pen, and this is what he told me happens. I've got a cousin's nephew's brother who once knew Job's son, and they said that how many people were talking about Job? How many people watched him walk through this fire? But he came out with his testimony intact. Romans chapter 8 and verse 28, it'll be up on the screens. It says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Can we read that together? And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. God doesn't waste the hurt that we go through. Some of the deepest contact points I've had with people come out of the deepest pains that I've had to go through. The way I handle funerals now is very different than the way I handled funerals before my mom's death. The way I talk to families who have lost children now has changed since Gina and I went through a miscarriage with a child of our own. The way I talk to people who are struggling with fear or anxiety or depression now is different than the way I used to talk with them or connect with them before I went through some of these struggles on my own. Out of some of your worst pain and grief will come some of your greatest ministry. Amen. There was a book written a while ago. You may have read it in high school. Anybody ever read Old Man of the Sea? Okay, 6 of you. There's a line in Old Man of the Sea. It says, a man can be destroyed, but not defeated. A man can be destroyed, but not defeated. Grief may be destroying everything you thought was a security for you. Grief may be tearing away at the inside, the core of you, but don't let it defeat you. There is hope. Don't let it defeat you. Don't let it be your end. You're in a season. You're going to go through these struggles. It's part of it. We're wired. It's okay to grieve. It's part of the process of loss. but don't let it defeat you. 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 12, it says, I know whom I have believed in, and am convinced that he is able to guard what I have entrusted into him until that day. I know who I can stand on, even in the lowest time when it feels like that box has become my coffin. And I hold on to his promises that he's with me, even in the shadow of the valley of the shadow of death. Through it all, I know it'll be well with my soul because of who's with me.